And that, brothers and sisters, brings me to our guest here at the AFL-CIO's book club this evening. Because no leader in American public life better embodies the idea that politics must be an expression of principles than our friend, Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts. And the title of her book, A Fighting Chance, says it all. Now, when I first met Elizabeth Warren, she was a Harvard professor standing up to Wall Street with little more than the power of the pen. She was the chair of an advisory oversight committee. People said reform couldn't happen. And yet, here we are today, having passed financial reform with a powerful new Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and Elizabeth Warren now sits in the hallowed Senate seat once occupied by Ted Kennedy. She still has a very, very powerful pen, a strong brain, and a warm heart. And she's putting all of them to use. In a little more than a year, she's written bipartisan legislation to restore Glass-Steagall, to re-regulate banks, to challenge secrecy in our trade negotiations, and to advocate for young people in the fight against college loan debt peonage and for affordable higher education. Now, she's held the feet of banks regulators to the fire, and if the press is to be believed, she was a critical factor and actor in the appointment of Janet Yellen, the first woman to be the chair of the Federal Reserve. Not bad, Senator, not bad at all. And Senator Warren is proving true what FDR showed us all, that we will turn out for and fight for the leaders who fight for us. All of this is to say that A Fighting Chance is a book well worth reading by a woman, quite frankly, I could not be more proud to call my friend and my sister, our champion, Senator Elizabeth Warren.
So I am so glad to be here tonight. Rich, thank you so much for organizing this. It's fun to be here. It's fun to be here with people and to have a chance to talk about something that's really important to me. And there is no place I'd rather be right now than right here. I want to tell you a little bit about the book, and I thought I'd read a couple of passages from the book, and then I hope we will have lots of time for questions and answers so that we can talk about whatever it is you would most like to talk about. I'll tell you about the book generally. The book is, it starts as a very personal book. It's a book about my family, my mom and my dad. It picks up when I'm 12. I was the late in life baby. My mother used to call me the surprise. Yeah, it took me a while to figure out what that meant. But by the time I was 12 years old, all three of my brothers were off in military service. And living at home with my mom and my dad. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. My dad sold carpet, and he had a heart attack. And had a long period without employment, and then the bills stacked up. We lost our family station wagon, and we came right to the edge of losing our home. My mother was 50 years old when she took her best dress out of the closet and pulled it on, put on her high heels, and walked over to the Sears to get a minimum wage job. And I'd just like to stop and point out, back in the 1960s, a minimum wage job would keep a family of three afloat, and that's what it is for us. We saved our house, But there was no money for college. I'm one of those kids who married at 19, babies in my early 20s, but I did have chances to go to school. I ended up at a public university, a commuter college, that cost $50 a semester. I know that's a number today that causes people to laugh, but you know, it is a reminder. There was a time in America when we invested in our kids, and we said that any kid who worked hard and showed a little promise could go to an affordable college. And again, it mattered, it opened doors for me, and is something that I think is important for us to do again, to make college affordable for all our kids. Now, what this book is about a personal story, because I believe it's America's story, about what we were, about what's happened to us, and about where we're headed. It's also a story, though, about fights. It just really is. It's a story about fights and fighting. It's a story about fights over whether or not families who've been laid low by medical problems and job layoffs and a family breakup or a death in the family will have a chance to right themselves economically. It's about fights with the banks over the giant bailout. It's about fighting to get the consumer agency, and ultimately it's about fighting for a place in the United States Senate. Now, one piece of this that I want to focus on, that I thought I'd talk about a little bit tonight, is about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and Rich already mentioned it. Just for those of you who aren't terribly familiar with it, I just want to point out to you where the world stood by the early 2000s. By the early 2000s, it was not possible in America to buy a toaster that had a 1 in 5 chance of bursting into flames, burning down your house, and putting you out on the street. It was not possible. It was, however, possible to refinance a home you already owned with a mortgage that had a 1 in 5 chance of ending up costing you your home. It was not only possible, it was happening all over America. And what was the difference between toasters and mortgages? The difference was the United States government. The United States government said the only way we're ever going to make markets work on products like toasters or medicine or children's toys is to make sure there are basic safety standards so that manufacturers can get out there and compete all they want, but they've got to compete on things you can see. They can compete on price, they can come up with a better idea, they can do all those things. But they don't get to compete by cheating people. They don't get to compete by hurting people. There was an agency, in fact multiple agencies, to make sure that happened with physical products, but not with financial products. And the consequence was, as we saw, millions of people were cheated out of their homes, and part of the consequence of this process was mortgages were packaged, sold down the line to pension funds, to towns, to communities all across this country, and it brought down our economy. So here we are in the middle of the financial crisis. It's 2009, and I had an idea that I've been working on for a couple of years for a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Basic ideas, really just like the other agencies. Get out there and compete on price, compete on things that are visible, but you don't get to compete by hiding more tricks back in the fine print than the next guy. You don't get to improve your profits by making people think the risk and the price are in one place and in fact they're in another. So that's what the consumer agency was about. And one particular reason I wanted to talk about it here and tonight is that the fight for the consumer agency began in this building. It began in this building up on the 8th floor. It began when Damon Silvers, who was then working as we were partners in the Congressional Oversight Panel, fighting with the big banks over the bailout, called together groups from all kinds of perspectives to have a meeting about financial reform. And the first item on the agenda was the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. We fought together. Basically what came out of that meeting is that all kinds of groups, led by the unions, but we had everyone. We had consumer groups, we had student groups, we had religious groups, we had lots and lots of different groups who were together. And in effect, even though the consumer agency was nobody's first responsibility, we got organized, all pulled in the same direction, ultimately ended up with Americans for Financial Reform, and began to put real energy behind getting the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. As I say, it started right here in this building. But here's a moment in the fight that I wanted to share with you tonight. We had gotten, finally, a good, strong consumer agency through the House. That happened in November of 2009. And now it had gone over to the Senate, where it was, at this moment, stuck in the Senate Banking Committee and had not yet emerged. And that's where I picked the story up. It was Friday morning, January 15th, 2010, and the calls started coming in early. I was at home, up early to work out on the treadmill in the basement, and I was still huffing and puffing when the phone rang for the first time. Had I seen this morning's Wall Street Journal? The rumors were flying on Capitol Hill. The consumer agency wasn't going to make it. In an effort to move the larger financial reform bill forward, Senator Dodd would trade it off. There might be some face-saving attempt to set up a new consumer protection department somewhere else in government, but there would be no strong, independent agency with the authority to get much done. The insiders sent the word out. Too bad, so sorry, it was a good idea. But unless the agency was dropped from the reform bill, the whole package of legislation would fail. Better to toss the consumer agency overboard and get the other reforms through. I listened. So this was it. The consumer agency was dead. All the families who had been cheated by the big banks and the credit card companies, all the hard work by Barney, the consumer groups, Heather, Dan, the president, all that knocking on doors and all those meetings, and now it was coming to an end. So I asked if there would be a vote, even a losing vote, but the answer was no. The death wouldn't be a public execution. Instead, the Senate Banking Committee would propose a financial reform bill with no consumer agency. No one in the Senate, not one single Democrat or one single Republican, would ever have to vote against the agency. Instead, it would just be quietly suffocated in its crib. No one would ever know exactly who killed it or why. So I asked my last question: when? How long before the locked-in version of the bill would be introduced in the Senate Banking Committee, with or without the consumer agency? Best estimate, 3 weeks. The deal wasn't finalized, and there were still a lot of other moving pieces that still needed to be worked out. So I called Dan. Dan was my wingman, former student and wingman down here in Washington. I called Dan and I said, Dan, we've got 3 weeks. The way I saw it, we had nothing to lose. I didn't want a job in the Capitol, so what did I care if I ticked off a lot of people in Washington? This was our last chance to get the agency into law. If we lost now, we lost forever. We have very little information about what had led to the latest assault on the agency, but we did know one thing. The Senate did not want a tough vote on this issue. Dan explained what that meant. The consumer agency was popular, and to a lot of senators, a vote on the new agency meant having to choose between angering the public and angering the banks. And they don't want to anger either. They preferred a quiet and slightly mysterious death for the consumer agency. So I figured too bad. Too damn bad. If a bunch of senators were going to pick the banks over families, then the American public had a right to know. And if we didn't win, at least we could raise one hell of a stink. And that's what we did. But I want to tell you what I learned from these fights. This book is about fights here in Washington. And here's what I learned firsthand. The game is rigged. The America I grew up in, the one that gave the daughter of a maintenance man a chance to become a Harvard professor and a United States senator, had changed fundamentally. America had once made building a middle class its first priority. Coming out of the Great Depression, look what America did. First, it put strong rules in place to level the playing field. It was all about having a cop on the beat. No one should steal your purse on Main Street or your pension on Wall Street. No kidding. Other basic safety rules: safe drinking water, safe medicine, and eventually safe toasters. America also built a future for its kids, investing in education so kids could have better jobs, produce more, and build more secure lives. Invest in roads and bridges and power grids so we had good jobs as we built them, and we created the right environment for better jobs here in America. And basic research. This is an amazing thing that America did. We invested in medical research, scientific research, engineering research. Why? Because we believe that if we built this giant pipeline of ideas, that it would create opportunities for new work, new jobs, new things in the future, opportunities for our kids that our parents could not even dream of. And America built labor unions. America's labor unions were on the front line in building America's middle class, moving kids out of factories, improving wages, safer working conditions, retirement, health care. America's labor unions were there, helping make sure that as our country got richer, our families got richer, and as our families got richer, our country got richer. It worked. It was an America that worked. And then it changed. About 30 years ago, the Republicans started pushing for a different approach. Their first move: take the cops off the beat. Not off Main Street, take them off Wall Street. Let the big banks load up on risks. Let them paint a bullseye on the backside of every American family. Make the word deregulation the mantra of the day. And the second move: cut taxes for those at the top. Open up huge tax loopholes for big corporations. And how are we going to pay for those tax cuts? By cutting investments. Cut investments in education, in infrastructure, and in basic research. And the third move: attack labor. Break the backs of the unions. Allow companies to reclassify workers. Negotiate trade deals that cost American jobs. And what was the result of those moves, those changes in policies? Banks and other corporations made huge profits, and billionaires kept more of their money. In other words, the rich got richer and the powerful got more powerful. Meanwhile, the middle class began to crumble. The economy crashed, and our kids, maybe the first kids in American history to do worse than their parents. By 2011, I was back in Massachusetts, and I was running for the United States Senate. I tell a lot in this book about the run-up to that run, and then what it was like for a first-time candidate to get out there and run in such a big, tough race. And I talk about a lot of friends that I see here in this room today. But I want to pick up one passage from the book that comes fairly late in discussing what it had been like to be in this campaign. During that long year of campaigning, I met lots of firefighters. I also met truck drivers, electricians and sheet metal workers, teachers and nurses, carpenters and musicians, janitors and bricklayers, postal workers, home health care aides, steel workers. I talked with them at construction sites and training centers, at job registries and volunteer events. They did many different kinds of work, and they had a wide range of worries. But they were all part of unions, unions that stood tall for all workers. Most of the union members I met with were painfully aware that unions across the country were losing ground, as fewer workplaces were unionized. But unions were also losing ground politically. More than one president of a local union told me that other politicians would come to them for money and endorsements. But when they left the union hall, those same politicians spoke only in code, never saying the word union in their speeches. I think it mattered that in speeches and rallies and roundtable discussions, I was glad to say the word long and loud: union. The way I saw it, unions had helped build America's middle class. They fought for better wages and reasonable hours. They fought for safer factories. They fought for pensions and retirement security. They fought for health care coverage. And every one of those benefits spread to other workers, union and non-union alike, which made the whole middle class stronger and more secure. And when the squeeze was on, unions showed up to fight for Social Security, to fight for Medicare, to fight for a higher minimum wage, to fight for equal pay for women, and to my great delight, to fight for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Unions fought for the values that keep us strong. Often, during the campaign, I would hear the phrase, corporate and labor influence in politics, as if corporate and labor were somehow two sides of the same coin. Really? Does anyone believe that an army of lobbyists fighting for tax loopholes and special breaks for one corporation is the same as unions fighting for Social Security and equal pay? Does anyone believe that when corporations give money to take down unions and support so-called right-to-work laws, that there are unions giving equal money to try to put companies out of business and themselves out of a job? Does anyone think that for every billionaire executive who can afford to write a check for $10 million to get his candidate elected to office, there's a union guy who can do the same? Give me a break. In the battle over who Washington was really working for, the unions knew which side they were fighting on, and they fought as hard as they could. I was honored to have the chance to fight alongside them. So, here's what I see out of this. Washington works for those who can hire an army of lobbyists and lawyers. It just doesn't work so well for families. I saw it with the big banks. They cheated American families, crashed the economy, got bailed out, and now the 5 biggest financial institutions in America are 38% bigger than they were during the crash. They still swagger through Washington, blocking reforms and pushing around agencies. They break the law, and no banker even faces the inconvenience of a trial, much less a little jail time. The game is rigged and it's not right. But let's be clear, it isn't just the big banks. Look at the choices the federal government makes today. Our college kids are getting crushed by student loan debt. We need to rebuild our roads and bridges and upgrade our power grids. We need more investment in medical research and scientific research. But instead of building a future, this country is bleeding billions of dollars in tax loopholes and subsidies that go to rich and powerful corporations. Think about this. The tax code subsidizes moving jobs overseas while people here at home look for work. Many Fortune 500 companies, profitable companies, pay zero in taxes. Billionaires get so many tax loopholes that they pay lower tax rates than their secretaries. But they all have lobbyists. Lobbyists and good friends in the Republican Party who make sure that every privilege, every subsidy, every loophole is protected. The game is rigged. The rich and the powerful have lobbyists, have lawyers, have powerful friends in Congress. Everyone else, not so much. This is how I think about it. We can whine about it, we can whimper, or we can fight back. Me, I'm planning to fight back.
Hear, hear.
I'm planning to fight back. I'm planning to fight back all the way. The game is rigged, and it's up to us to do something about it. And I just want to remind you all, every time someone says, oh, but it's hard to make change, Washington's so broken, how can we get anything done? Not only did we get that little consumer agency passed through and into law, remember the one, let's just be clear, that the banks said they would kill and that they spent more than $1 million a day lobbying against. Every time somebody tells you we can't get anything done, remember the little Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which we got because of the efforts of people in this room and people just like you. That tells me, yes, we can win. We can win. We have won. I also learned from this exercise, this is our moment in history. We decide the future of this country. I write this book out of gratitude to an America that invested in kids like me and gave us opportunities so that we could build something in the future. And I wrote this book out of gratitude to my fellow fighters. Fighters like Richard Trumka and David Silvers, like Adam Green and Mike Lux, to the fighters who get up every single day and say, whatever it takes, we're in this because we believe all the way down to our toes in an America that will build a future so all of our kids get a fighting chance. I told Rich we're going to do some Q&A, and I want to stay standing because you can always tell a teacher, I want to see what's going on in the back row.
How do we get the issues that you care about to drive this election?
So it's a wonderful question. How do we get the issues that we care about to drive the election? I think there are two parts to that. The first one is we have to make it clear that this is about values. You know, I talk about economics, I talk about what happens to families, but the reality is this is about our values as a people, our values as a country. Are we an America that believes that if you've already made it, this is your country, we will protect you. All of the policies will be aimed toward protecting your privileges? Or are we an America that believes we invest so the next kid has a chance to make it big, and the kid after that, and the kid after that? I think that that's a huge part of this. We've got to talk to people about the values. The second part is we have got to stay energized and engaged. I know it has been a tough many, many years for us. I look around this room and see people I have fought alongside for 20 and more years. But if we become disengaged, if we become discouraged, if we say, you know, somebody else will have to carry it this year, then the other side wins. We have given up at that point. And the rich and the powerful, who have so many advantages, the advantages that are brought to you by being rich and powerful and organized and what you can hire and what you can buy, they get it. What we have to remember is all we have on our side are our voices, our values, and our votes. And we've got to use all of them. That's what we've got to use all of them.
Thank you. What do you think about the Senate's failure to pass the minimum wage, and what else can we do to get this done?
So what do I think about the Senate's failure to pass the minimum wage? It stinks. It stinks. It stinks in a way that really is fundamentally shocking. So just look at the numbers. CEOs have gotten great raises over the last 7 years, but people working minimum wage, not so much. For me, there are 14 million reasons to raise the minimum wage. 14 million reasons. That's the number of children whose economic lives would be made better if the minimum wage moved to $10.10. We have an economic responsibility to do this. We have a moral responsibility to do this. My view is that question ties to the one we were just talking about, how we get people energized and into the fight for this election. This is a clear difference between where the Republicans are and where the Democrats are. We have to drive this home up and down the streets of every town, every community in America. We have got to make this clear. That's how we will get the minimum wage increased.
Can you talk a little bit about refinancing student loans? Why now?
Oh,
and do you think we have a chance to pass the bill?
Okay, so let's make sure everybody's on the same page about where we are on student loans. There's now $1.2 trillion in outstanding student loan debt. Think about that. There is more student loan debt outstanding than any other form of debt in America except for mortgages. So more than credit card debt, more than car loans, is student loans. We have seen a huge run-up in student loans. Last year, 71% of college seniors had student loan debt. Think about that. So we've got a huge amount of student loan debt. That's part one. Part two, it's starting to hit the economy. So the Fed has turned out a report on this. The CFPB has been talking about this. Young people are not buying homes at the predicted rates. They're not buying cars. They're not starting small businesses. They're not getting married. I mean, we're just watching piece after piece. They can't save for retirement. Young people are not moving into their economic lives. And part of the reason for that is the student loan problem. They've got these huge student loans outstanding. So that's the second part. It's starting to affect us all. We have a housing industry that's having more trouble recovering because not enough more young people are living at home with their parents and not moving out into apartments and into homes. But the third part, the United States government offers to help those young people who can't afford to pay for college and then charges them a rate that covers the cost of the money, as it should, the administrative costs, the bad debt losses, and then for undergrads, nearly doubles that. For graduate students, nearly triples that, so that the student loan program is producing tens of billions of dollars in profits off the backs of our kids going to school. That is obscene. That is obscene. So, what can we do? The answer is we need to refinance the student loan debt. And I'll just give you two quick ideas about refinancing it that we may be talking about very soon. Okay, said all in caps. One is, students can't refinance their loans. I don't know if you know this, but anybody who's got a home, now that we're in historically low interest rates, homeowners have been able to refinance their mortgages. People with car loans have refinanced. Businesses have refinanced. Shoot, townships, governments have refinanced their loans. Everybody except students, because they are barred by law from refinancing that debt. So we've got kids outside. Some people are looking at me with mouths agape. Exactly right. Students are out there on student loans at 7%. There are some at 8%, 9%, 10%. I always like it. People nod when I hit. You can nod when I hit your percentage. 11%, right? So the idea is we need to refinance student loans. Just last July, the United States Congress voted, and the president signed into law a bill that said for new borrowers, the proposed interest rate was way too high, and we were going to bring it down. It's 3.8% for undergrad. It's over 4 for a grad. My view is, if that was what Congress said, that is the right interest rate for new borrowers, then it's the right interest rate for everybody who borrowed money to go to school. If you'll let me, Rich. I know these are long answers, but I love this stuff. One more piece. How are we going to pay for it? We're going to pay for it with the Buffett rule. Think about it. We've got billions of dollars right now that is flowing out of the Treasury on loopholes for people who make millions of dollars a year, billions of dollars a year. The Buffett rule plugs those loopholes, and the idea is we take all of that money and use it to bring down the interest rate on student loans. That way America can make it.
What do you think about the historic appointment of Janet Yellen, and what difference do you think she'll make?
Woohoo! That's what I think about the historic. I really do. I am delighted that Janet Yellen is over at the Fed, but I'll tell you why. I'll tell you the best reason I can. Read her speech when she was sworn in. I know when you think about Fed chairs for many, many, many generations, there are always these very dry speeches about monetary policy. And they are. And I'm sure other monetary policy people hang on every word, but they're monetary policy pieces. Janet Yellen had a piece in her speech when she was sworn in about what it means to be unemployed and about why monetary policy matters. Because monetary policy is one of the ways that we try to deal with unemployment. And she talked in that speech about unemployment in very human terms, what it means to a family, what it means to a community. And my view is we got somebody who's a Fed chair who's got a good head, but she's also got a good heart.
Absolutely.
Yep, I like Janet.
Yeah. How do we increase union membership, especially among young people?
I should yield that one to you, Rich. That you should educate us on this one. Part of it is, I think, is that we have to talk in the specifics. This is about student loans. This is about jobs. This is about Social Security. These are very specific things. And as I said earlier, it's about values. But for me, I'll leave this question to you. You get the last answer here. Union membership is fundamentally about a notion that we all do better when we work together.
Absolutely.
And that's the single message around it. And I find that young people care enormously about this and believe it, that we will do better if we make those investments together, that we will build a future together. For me, that's what it's all about.
And the facts bear it out.
Yep.
Union workers make 28% more than their non-union counterparts. And I'll just tell a very quick story about why you need a union. My son at the time was about 4 years old. And he and his buddy were playing in the backyard, and they had one of those little electric cars. And they couldn't get it to go up a hill. And he asked me, he said, Dad, and his buddy asked me, what is a union? You're a union guy. What does a union do? And I asked them, I said, Richard pushed the car up the hill. And he grunted and he slid and he couldn't do it. I said, now let's get the three of us together and push it up the hill. And all three of us pushed the car up a hill, and I said, that's what a union does.
All right.
It allows people to come together to do things that they can't do by themselves. Look, we want to thank you. We want to thank you, not just for being here, but in the broader sense for giving a lot of people hope. And by showing people that there is a fight left here in Washington, D.C. worth fighting for, and that you're at the front of that pack, leading that fight, and we are all with you.
Thank you.
Each and every way of the time. And I'll use the statement that I made the first time we met. You remember that?
I do remember it.
At the White House?
I remember it.
We were sitting in the White House at an event, a large event. The president was up front.
Wait. I get to set this story up then.
Okay.
I hadn't met Rich, but I knew who he was. Damon had pointed you out to me, and as he always does. This was the meeting. It's actually in the book. This was the meeting when the White House was going to announce what was in their proposal for financial reform. So it's before we've made it through the House. It was what the White House was going to put forward for its financial reforms. And I'll just be honest, I was scared to death they were going to leave out the consumer agency. Or the second possibility was they'd mentioned the consumer agency, but it would be on a laundry list with 574 other things, and it would be really easy just not to do that one, and instead we'll do, some other small things. And they had invited all the groups, lots of folks, Barney Frank and Chris Dodd, and all these folks to get together and to hear the announcement. And so we're pulled into this room, and I look around in my usual well-organized way, come in, and I'm looking for a chair. And there's one chair, but they've jammed, tiny little chairs, jammed these chairs so tight together that to get in to the chair, I got to slide one right back into Rich Trumka's shins. So I said, Mr. Trumka, do you mind if I sit here, right? And you said,
don't worry, Elizabeth. I have your back. And then I followed up by saying, and I will always have your back.
That's right.